Now, today, Russia said it has paused diplomatic negotiations to stop the fighting in Ukraine. And this comes fewer than 24 hours after President Trump said Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy, quote, hate each other so much he would have to do all the talking if they ever met face to face. Joining me now is Admiral Mark Montgomery, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who has worked with Ukrainian soldiers. Good morning, Admiral. Great to have you with us, joining us from Washington. You know, yesterday, President Zelenskyy said, look, sometimes meeting face to face, it has to happen, even if you don't like the faces. So despite the chasm that exists between Putin and Zelenskyy, is a meeting between them, perhaps with President Trump, inevitable?
I do think it's inevitable. I don't think it'll be bilateral. I think it'll have to involve President Trump as well, because I just don't think the two, Zelenskyy and Putin together, can get anywhere. Zelenskyy represents to Putin, you know, his failure, his inability to capture Ukraine during his invasion in 2022. So I don't think that would be an effective discussion without President Trump there moving it along.
And give us a bit of a reality check. I know that you've worked with Ukrainian soldiers on the ground in the past. What does the Russian incursion and now years of war feel like for them in the present?
Well, look, they have amazing resilience, the Ukrainians. I'm always shocked at their ability to absorb the punishment that's put out by the Russian forces, both militarily, but also against their military, but also against their civilian critical infrastructure and civilians. And Russia clearly targets critical infrastructures that support civilians, like electrical power, hospitals, water systems, with both missile attacks and cyber attacks. So great resilience inside Ukraine. You know, I don't think they'll lose this war, but they need increased pressure from the United States if we're going to get this war to a ceasefire.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about next. You know, since President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, there's been no progress on a ceasefire. In fact, Russia's attacks appear to have intensified, which is saying something since they've creeped up all year. Is Russia winning?
I don't think Russia's winning. I do think they're achieving small battlefield victories that are, but really incremental and not significant. But that is what Putin's pushing. His is the team that just said there's a pause in negotiations, because the reality is they're executing a war. And if President Trump doesn't bring pressure on Putin, and, you know, we've been every 2 weeks for the last 3 months, President Trump has said, at the end of this 2 weeks, I'm going to do something. Right. If the president doesn't eventually do something, Putin's going to continue this pattern.
Well, if then the pattern continues of no ceasefire talks, Russian incursions and attacks ongoing amid Ukrainian resilience, what happens next? Who wins if this gets dragged out?
Well, I think there's one other wild card in there, which is that the Ukrainians are now able to strike Russian critical infrastructure. So we saw 2 nights ago an attack on the oil refinery at Rizhki, one of the big 3 oil refineries. They have both long-range drones, and they're beginning to have long-range land attack cruise missiles, which have power, have a significant payload. So in my mind, the combination of those long-range drones and cruise missiles are going to allow Ukraine to do what President Trump won't do, which is put the hard squeeze on Russian fossil fuel exports.
Really important to get your insight on some of those specifics as this war drags on. Admiral Mark Montgomery, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.